A mother's joy. A mother's joy. It's Mother's Day, and, one of the things that, if you're a lady here today, you're probably, the idea is being spoiled, right? That's in some ways should be happening. If not, then somebody needs to get on the stick in your life. But in some ways, you should be getting spoiled today. Maybe you're going to get taken out for lunch, or maybe you should get a card or a flower, or maybe you just need somebody to get a picture, or get a family gathering together, or something like that. And all these things are designed to help you to know that you're loved, that you're cared about, that you're honored, and that we want to be able to bring you some semblance of joy in your life. And so I got thinking about, what is a mother's joy supposed to consist of? And I got looking at this passage with Hannah and Samuel, and of course we know the story from Sunday school, and we got it read to us here again this morning about how all this came to be. But as we look through the passage this morning, I think we'll be a little bit surprised at what we may have always thought about where Hannah's joy came from versus what the Bible tells us. So I want us to look at that this morning, because I think it's not just for mothers, it's really for all of us. The same truths are there for everyone. And we see this morning. Of course, we know the story. There was this man, Elkanah. He had 2 wives. And without getting into that whole issue this morning again, we've addressed that in previous messages of what the Bible has to say about that. But nonetheless, he had 2 wives, Peninnah and Hannah. And Peninnah had children, and Hannah did not. And so, this was just the lot that they both had. But nonetheless, of course, there was they went to worship. They wanted to honor the Lord. They came and did those things before Eli, the high priest. And eventually, Hannah was so upset about all this. She comes, she prays before the Lord. She asks for this child, and God answers her prayer. And the answer came in the form of this son named Samuel, who she had promised the Lord, if he would give her this son, that she would allow this son to be used in the Lord's service the rest of his life. And this is exactly what we see play out in this chapter. And so it's always such a nice story to tell in Sunday school, and to hear about how Hannah, trusted the Lord, and she finally got this boy and gave her all that she really wanted in this boy. And I think as we look through this morning, we might find that Hannah didn't have quite the amount of joy from the things that we think that she did. And I want to look at those this morning, because the first thing that we see is this other wife. I'm sure that can't be a good situation, even in the best of situations, but it was really a bad time for Hannah. Here was Peninnah in verse 2. It says, this man, Elkanah, had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah. The name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So we see right off the bat, there's a problem developing. Here's this man. He has 2 wives. The one woman has children, and the other one didn't. Now, in today's day and age, it's kind of more of some people want big families and some people don't, and it can be we don't care if we don't have children, and some people, have these mindsets. But in this day and age, having or not having children was really a major thing. This was a part of the fabric of society. Part of the lady's duty almost for the family was to bear children and to bear sons. And this was a way in which this was a sign of God's blessing. And so here was Peninnah with, it doesn't say how many, it just says children. So she had more than one. And yet Hannah was sitting here and had no children. Someone who didn't ever seem to have God's blessing, didn't seem to have, the favor to be able to bear children. And I'm sure this was a great weight on her just in and of itself. But it's not, that wasn't enough, because Peninnah not only had children, and she had lots of children, she also had lots of pride about her children, didn't she? Peninnah had a whole lot of pride going on, and she had really set herself and Hannah up in this adversarial, competitive type of position. I'm sure every time that another child came along, Peninnah maybe even had a scoreboard somewhere like, see, look, Hannah, got another one. Look, Hannah, we have more children here. How many do you have on your board, Hannah? This was Peninnah's mindset. She was really, she was keeping score. And this had turned into a really ugly situation. And the first thing we see is really where Hannah should maybe have been getting some support from those in her family, those that she was with all the time. Instead of getting support from them and getting joy from, even though she didn't have children, the fact is she was being despised. She was being despised by Peninnah. And so it says in verse 6, her adversary also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Peninnah would not let up. She was just constantly at her. Verse 7 says, she did so year by year. She went up to the house of the Lord. So she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. This was just an ongoing, year after year type of thing. She was relentless. And she got Hannah all worked up to the point where she could do nothing but cry and weep, and she didn't even want to eat. She was so downtrodden, so despised by those that should have really been supporting her. This was this long-term attack, constantly harassing, constantly persecuting, constantly belittling Hannah. And she was, Peninnah really, if Cinderella's stepsisters were modeled after anyone, it was probably after Peninnah. She was just like vile. Whatever she did, whatever she said, we're not told, but we do know it was going on for a long period of time, and it was so hateful and so vengeful that Hannah was completely overwhelmed and consumed with this other wife of Elkanah's. It had really gotten to her to the point that she couldn't eat. The words and actions that Peninnah had given her had consumed her. And do you know what? When you are consumed by that type of belittling and persecution, do you think there was joy in Hannah's life? I don't think we see any joy. For years, we don't see joy, not just because she had no children, but because she was constantly under attack. If only she could have a child. Think about Hannah's perspective. If only she could have a child, all of a sudden she would have some kind of ammunition to fight back against these attacks of Peninnah. She would finally be able to, have something to put on the scoreboard. But yet she had nothing. And the fact is, sometimes we understand people that maybe should be supporting us and helping us are the ones that throw the vilest attacks at us. Sometimes it goes on for a long period of time, doesn't it? And sometimes those attacks and that persecution can really steal our joy, just like happened to Hannah. And so Hannah found out very quickly, and as we see in the story very evidently, is Hannah was not going to find joy in her relationships with others. Now, not to say that Peninnah acted right, or that we can't never find joy in relationships, because God gives all things that are good for us, for our pleasure and for our joy. But Hannah realized, and the story tells us, this was not where she was going to find true joy, not in her relationships. And so we turn to Elkanah, her husband. Verse 5 tells us this. Unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. So you think, well, Peninnah really didn't like Hannah, but her husband loved her. He was doing all he could to provide for her. He gave her a worthy portion, it says. And it says not just that he gave her stuff, it says he truly loved her. She had the love of her husband. She had this love, she had this provision. But, people that say, if I just had love and money, I would have everything I need. They find that when they get love and money, they still fall short. And this was the case with Hannah, because Hannah had the love and she had the money, but she was still in a lot of ways diminished or discounted by her husband. because in many ways her husband was oblivious to all of this. Look at verse 8. It says, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why weepest thou? Why eatest thou not? Why is thy heart grieved? Are you living in the same house, Elkanah? I mean, where are you? Where were you the last couple of years? You didn't hear any of this stuff that was going on between Peninnah and Hannah? I mean, he was completely like right over his head, right? Oblivious in every way. He didn't understand. Why are you weeping, Hannah? Why, I love you. I mean, everything's good. Why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? If it's just about this child, Hannah, if it's about the fact that you don't, hey, isn't my love enough for you? I'm Elkanah. I'm the guy, you don't need those children. You got me. What else could you ask for? And so really, in many ways, he completely missed the whole, my wife was being attacked by Peninnah. He also didn't really value the fact of how much she wanted this child. Why couldn't she just be happy with what she had? Wasn't that enough to give her joy? He loved her. He cared for her. I think this was true and genuine. But I think a lot of times, sometimes wives just aren't understood by their husbands, are they? Not to say that we don't try, but I'll go back to one of the very early Mother's Days that I had with my wife. And honestly, I'll just tell you this because I've learned over the years a lot of things. This happens to be one of them. But I still go back to this because, I have always looked at Mother's Day as kind of what I call a Hallmark holiday. It's something that they've invented to be able to sell more cards and flowers and whatever. It's a Hallmark holiday. And I never really put a lot of stock into it. I'm sure I made my mother cards and things and did things for her. But the fact is, it was just, it's a passing thing. For my mother, however, for my wife, however, this was an important thing. And especially when we had our first child. And I had no clue about it. But she was my wife. She wasn't my mother. So Mother's Day comes along, and she says, well, what are you going to do for Mother's Day? I said, well, I don't know. You're not my mother. Like I say, I've learned a lot of things through the years. That was one thing I learned not to say ever again. I was just oblivious. I had no clue. Really, it's not a holiday I celebrate, but it was important to her, and I had no idea that it had that much weight and that value. I've learned at this point, it's a big deal. We have to make a big deal of it. That's good, and mothers are worthy of it. But I'm just saying that sometimes we want to understand. It's not that we don't care. Sometimes we just miss all the clues. Sometimes we just don't understand. I think this was the case with Elkanah. He just didn't understand. Someone who should have known Hannah the best just went right over his head. He didn't understand why she was crying. He didn't understand why she couldn't just be happy with what she had. And so Hannah realized too, and I think Elkanah realized this as well, Hannah wasn't going to find her joy in the relationship she had with her husband. It was a good relationship. Obviously, he loved her. He cared about her. He provided for her. He said he was better to her than 10 sons could have been. But the fact is, in the end, that wasn't where her true joy was going to be found, because he really, in many ways, didn't understand her heart. He didn't know what her heart needed. And so we turn then to her and her son Samuel. And of course, this is where the Sunday school lessons a lot of times turn to see, God answered her request. This is the great lesson from the story, that we can ask God and he will give us what we really ask for, and that will bring us the joy that we need. But did you ever see what happens with Hannah and this son? I don't know if you've ever thought through this before, but it says here in verse 24, it says, when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and the house of the Lord under the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young. You see these 2 clues here in verse 24. She had weaned the child was young, and here she was taking him up to the house of the Lord. This wasn't just a casual visit. This was a follow-through on a commitment that she had made to the Lord. This was something that I'm sure grieved her deeply in the sense of, here's my young little child. Perhaps one of the it's probably one of the most confusing aspects of this story that used to always bother me, is here we have Hannah taking this young child who can hardly stand for himself yet and basically dropping him off at the doorstep of some old priest and saying, here, you raise this kid, and because I committed him to the Lord, and it's going to be, he's going to work for you now. And this was a young child. She had weaned him, but we know probably she, lasted as long as she could before this happened. He could have been maybe 4 years old, maybe 5 at the oldest, but still very, very young. Here she drops him off at Eli's doorstep, someone who we know from his raising of his own sons wasn't the best father. By the way, Hophni and Phinehas, his 2 own sons, they were wicked. And the Bible tells us about that in other parts of the story. So here he was, this old priest who didn't raise his own sons right. Here's Samuel being dropped off at his doorstep. And Hannah had to recognize at this point, not only was she not going to see her only child grow up, the one that she had prayed for, the one she had longed for. You ever think about this? Hannah was no longer going to have a daily influence in this child's life. She was not going to get to, receive those hand-drawn cards for Mother's Day. She wasn't going to be able to bring him a birthday cake for his birthday or make him his favorite meal. He's not going to be able to come running to her when he scrapes his knee. There's going to be all kinds of events as he grows and learns and develops as a young boy that she's going to miss out on. Yeah, she's going to be involved as much as she can, but it's not very often. She's going to miss all of the joys of motherhood. She's going to leave this young boy at the feet of Eli. She's going to entrust him with him. But what does she say? She says in verse 26, she says, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. This was the child that she had prayed for. This was the one she had asked the Lord to give her. And even though she knew this was not going to even go well probably at home, when Peninnah came back and said, see, you still have no child. But her integrity and her honor were more important than even the joy that she hoped to get from this child. She would be distanced from her son. She would be distanced from her son, not because God had taken the son from her, but because her own level of commitment meant she was willing to live at a distance from the very thing that she wanted and desired and longed for to give her that joy. She asked the Lord to give him to her, and now she was ready to give him back. It says she lent him to the Lord. He's loaned out. She would follow through in the commitments that she had made. I've got to imagine that was a hard commitment to follow through on. Ladies, with the day and age we live in, we don't see this type of integrity, do we? We see a lot of promises being made and, fingers crossed behind the back while the promises are being made. And we see a lot of things that happen in our world that show that we really don't mean what we say. We don't follow through with the promises that are made a lot of the time. And, a lot of heartache and grief come from a lack of integrity, a lot of lack of honor. And I can't imagine what Hannah must have gone through, but I can tell you what, her integrity and her honor and her commitment are recorded for all the generations that followed her to here. And isn't that true for your own lives as well? We think, oh, this is a hard commitment to keep. this is hard for me to maybe I'll just find a way out. But do you know what? Your children, your children's children, all that follow you, all that are around you, they will see integrity in your life. And they will follow after that. This is what we find in Hannah, a lady of integrity, a lady of honor, one that when she makes a commitment to the Lord, she stays with it. And you know, it's not likely that we're ever going to be in the same position as Hannah was, where we have to come to terms with that type of commitment, or even deal with those same level of emotions that she must have been dealing with. But I can tell you what, we do live in a society, many of which whose parents are distanced from their children. There's a lot of broken homes in our world today. There's a lot of times when, through divorce or other circumstances, we see families being broken up and either the mother or the father being somewhat distant from their children. They're not a part of their daily lives. The children that they wanted to have, you know, when the marriage was good, when things were going well, the children that they thought were going to build them up and bring them joy and bond them together, ultimately they've become distanced from. And they find that sometimes that distance makes it so that they don't get the joy that they hoped for. They long for it, but they don't have it. They also find sometimes that, you know, the fact is, ladies, you know for the fact that sometimes children don't always bring you joy either. Sometimes children break your heart. Sometimes children don't do what you hope them to do. They don't become what you hoped them, prayed for them to be. And they can break your heart as well. And the fact is, what is Hannah finding? What's she demonstrating in the story? The fact that her joy not only is not going to come from her relationships with others, her joy is not going to come from the love and money and respect from her husband. Her joy is not even going to come from her own children. That's not where her joy is going to be found in. We leave the end of chapter 1. Hannah really is just as heartbroken as she was at verse 1. So we get to turn the page. And I want to read to you the first verse of 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 1. After all this went down, it says, Hannah prayed and said, My heart rejoiceth in the Lord. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. And then she goes on. We're not going to read all of it this morning. But the fact is, I don't know at what point Hannah realized this. But certainly by this point in time, she realized her joy couldn't be found in all these other things. Her only true joy was going to be found in the Lord. She says these different phrases, which I think echo exactly what she needed triumph over in all of these other circumstances in her life. She says, first of all, my heart rejoiceth in the Lord. She had recognized she was going to find her joy only in the Lord, in Him alone. Was it going to be in her husband or her relationships or her children or her son or anything else in her life? She says there's one source of joy, and that source is God Himself. And then she says, mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies. This is a metaphorical way of saying that, you know what? The Lord puts me in a place that I don't have to be the underdog. I don't have to be the one who's oppressed. I don't have to be the one that is always under the weight of people attacking me or not understanding me or being taken from me. I can be above those things. That's what she's saying. Her greatest enemy, Peninnah, would not find that type of joy in the Lord. You know where Peninnah was getting her joy from? Right? She was that squeaky wheel. She was always, nipping. And that's how she was trying to get her joy. And Hannah says, no, I'm not going to find that type of joy. I'm not going to go after that. The Lord's going to be my defense when people attack me and taunt me, and when bitterness and injustice seems to be done against me. Those are the times I'm going to realize my joy's in the Lord, and he puts me above these situations that I'm in. Because you can never have joy as long as you're living below your circumstances. This is where Hannah realized. And so then she finally sums it up with this statement: I rejoice in thy salvation. I rejoice in thy salvation. She could look forward to a day when Christ would come, when the Messiah would ultimately provide the redemption she needed so that she could have a hope of a future. She looked forward to a salvation that was to be found in her Lord. Her hope was wrapped up in her joy. She knew there was a day coming when all the woes of this world weren't going to be around anymore. She knew there was a day she was going to be put into the presence of the Lord. She knew there was a day that all of the sin and all of the lack of joy that she sometimes was under the burden of would be removed from her life. The Lord is the source of her salvation, and that's what brought her joy. Hannah recognized something that some of us take a lifetime to learn. We're not going to find joy by trying to find the latest pleasure, by trying to wrap it all up into, well, we have to have family's going to bring me my joy, my husband's going to bring me my joy, I have this support, I have these people that you know what? People will fail you. People will not understand you. People will lack integrity. Children will do their own thing. And do you know what you're going to find? Yeah, God gives us good relationships and good people in our life to bring us joy, but we must never allow ourselves to believe the lie that that's a replacement for the true joy that can be found in the Lord. That's what Hannah is there to show us through this story. We can't find joy in anything else. Psalm 32:11 tells us this: Be glad in the Lord, and rejoice, ye righteous, and shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart. Let our joy be found in the Lord today. That's true and good advice, not just for mothers, but for each one of us.